Hello, everyone, and welcome to AXA Arctic Live. It's really, really wonderful to have you with us. My name's Jamie from Encounter EDU, and I will be your host for today for this wonderful expert interview with polar traveler and polar field expert Nick Cox. Good morning, Nick.
Good morning, Jamie. Good morning, everyone.
Lovely to have you with us. I've got a few shout outs to give, and I'm just going to introduce people to where we are, but then we'll get back. And I'm really looking forward to talking more and also getting through all the questions that have been sent through. So normally on Arctic Live, we would be up in Ny-Ålesund, the northernmost community in the world. And I've got my magnificent mini globe here just to show you where we'd be. And if I just get that close to the camera. So we can see here is the UK, Norway, and then traveling north, this tiny island here, halfway between the north of Norway and the North Pole is Svalbard. And on that island is the community of Ny-Ålesund. So that is where we'd be. But we are on lockdown Arctic Live. You can see Ny-Ålesund behind me here, a wonderful research community with stations from a host of different countries: Norway, Germany, France, Netherlands. We've got Korea, China, India, as well as Italy. I probably missed out a few there, but I think 11 different countries having stations up there. And Arctic Live is two things. It's a science research trip. So we're looking at how the Arctic Ocean is being affected by human activity. And that's in two ways. That's with plastics, and that's with something called ocean acidification, which is where increased carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is absorbed into the ocean and changes its chemistry. Now, next week, we'll be looking at a lot of the science. This week is all about life in the Arctic and how you survive and work up. So just coming over and just finding out who we've got online. We have some amazing schools, and we'll give the shout outs shortly. Then we will work through and try to answer as many of the pre-submitted questions as possible, and then come to the live chat. Now, the live chat is fantastic. Please make sure, if you're under 13, that you have a parent, guardian, or teacher who's logged in there to submit any questions, any comments, or just to say where you're calling in from or watching from. Please remember, it is a live classroom, so it's not a live chat room. So please try and keep your comments on topic. That would be absolutely fab. Really, really great. And then we've got so many questions that you guys have put in advance. We may not get through all of them, but luckily for us, Nick's also coming back later this afternoon. So if we don't get to your question in this session, we will try and answer it in the next session. That will be available on our channel using Catch Up. So those will be available to watch afterwards. Do subscribe to the Encounter EDU YouTube channel to be notified for when those extra sessions come online. But coming on, we have students from the UK, USA, Greece, Ireland, New Zealand, and Spain who are joining us today. We have shout outs, which is fab. We have hello to all children tuned in from St. Paul's Church of England Primary School in Mill Hill. Hi to everybody from St. Paul's. Hello to everyone taking part from St. Mary's Catholic Primary School in Beckenham. And Mrs. Byrne says that all the staff are really missing the children and can't wait to see them all again soon, and take care and stay safe where you are. Lovely message. So hi to all the students from St. Mary's. Hi to everyone from Oakfield Academy. Hello to all the Year 9 students from Guildford County, and that's from your geography teachers who are missing you. I imagine you're missing school too. Hi to Brains International School in Spain. Hello to everybody there. Really great to have you with us. We've got shout outs to hello to AGSB Jogsock, and that's from Mr. Williams. to all the Year 9 geographers at Waden School in Farnham who continue to work so hard. You're amazing on home on your studies. And that's from Mr. Bingham, Miss Bell, Miss Meck, and Miss Lister. So hi to all you guys working hard at home. A big shout out from the science staff at Greenhill School in Tenby to our very hard-working Year 7 students who have been fantastic during very difficult circumstances. Wonderful to have you with us, and your teachers are all really, really proud of you. So keep up the great work. Keep working hard. That's to Zakaria, Yaya, Isa, and Mariam, your wonderful home learning scientists in the making. Great stuff. A big hi to all Year 7 children from Ropu Karriaria at West Ayrton School in North Canterbury, New Zealand. Great to have you with us, dialing in from the other side of the world. Really, really fab. We've got Oscar from Anglesey, who I think has been on practically every single lockdown learning lesson that we've been doing. Kites class at Roxton Primary School, Year 7 boys at Eden's Boys School in Bolton. That's from Miss Riley. Red class at Furbank Primary School in Royton. We've got hello to all Year 10 students at St John Plessington on the Wirral, watching as part of their cold environments topic. Well, you've come to the right place. And Nick and I were up on the Wirral watching the launch of the Royal Research Ship Sir David Attenborough just a few months ago. So great to have you joining us from there. We've got Union Point Academy in Kentucky in the USA. Fab to have you with us. You're up very, very early, or maybe you'll watch just on catch up. And then last but not by no means least, hi to 5W, and they are from Thorpe Hall School in Southend-on-Sea. And Mrs. Whitehead is so proud of how you're all coping with home learning and misses you tons. And big up to all the young scientists who are watching. It's amazing to have you with us, and especially under these challenging circumstances. Hopefully we could transport you to a different place during this live lesson. But without further ado, Nick, it's so wonderful to have you on Arctic Live. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, Jamie. And normally we're in cold climes together, and these are odd times, but thank goodness we can do this.
We've got a heap of questions for you, and you've got so much experience of the polar regions. I don't think our watching audience quite realizes the breadth and depth of your polar expertise. Could you briefly describe sort of from how did you first start exploring and working in the polar regions, and a sort of a career highlights, just to sort of give us a sense of your work?
I fell in love with, I think rather like you, fell in love with polar regions at an age of probably some of you who are listening in today, school time. I was about 6 years old and got very keen. I joined the British Antarctic Survey this is ancient history for you school children, in 1975 as a 21-year-old, and was away for 2.5 years. And came home and then immediately went up to the Arctic to skipper a boat deploying geological field camps. And then went back to the Antarctic for another 18 months, another winter, a third winter. And then after that, I spent the Arctic summers skippering boats or leading sledge teams, one on the East Coast, a winter expedition, and 6 seasons skippering summer boat trips in the Arctic, interspersed with going down to the Antarctic for the summer season, and be doing all sorts of things, from becoming a dog driver to field guide, generally, supporting and helping scientists to do the marvelous work that they do in this extraordinary climate. So it's every year, north, south, or both, for the past 45 years now. So as you can see, I'm getting very long in the tooth.
Nick, I mean, it's quite amazing, and it leads us really nicely into our first question, and that's from Greenhill School, who would like to know what's been your favourite moment whilst exploring or working in the Arctic.
Favourite moment, I would say, and there are lots of favourites to choose from. And I would say the big favourite is seeing a polar bear for the very first time. And for me, it was being stuck in ice in a boat. I'd been away for a month and a half in this boat, a very small wooden boat, and had been stuck in ice for a week, couldn't get out. And me and the engineer, we walked across the ice floes to the land to see if we could see somewhere up the coast that we might maneuver to. And there, round the corner on the ice, was a very fine and very beautiful polar bear. The first polar bear you ever see is exciting and humbling, and all those things. They really are incredible.
And Nick, I mean, we're going to come back to these. I mean, amazing experience. And I mean, I've always wondered whether I want to see a polar bear or not. Up, how close do you want them to be? But we've got questions coming in fact, about polar bears. And this is from West Ayrton School in New Zealand. Is I don't know how far away your first polar bear spotting was, but what do you do if a polar bear comes towards or into camp?
Yeah, I mean, it's the number one sort of thing to keep in your mind is that we are the visitors to Arctic regions. We're walking into their natural domain, and we treat them with huge respect and try not to disturb them. And the last thing we'd ever want to do is to have to damage one, to scare one away and scare it, or worse still, to have to go and shoot one, which would just be an awful thing to do. So we're terribly careful. And but there are all sorts of little tricks to take into account. Most bears, and I've seen probably hundreds of bears, I don't know quite how many, but so many of them. But most bears will pass you by. They might be interested, but they just pass you by. If they've got a full tummy, a full stomach, and they're everything's fine, they'll pass you by. They usually reckon, and the advice I give to people going out is be wary, or particularly on guard. There are 4 types of polar bear to be really careful of, and one is the classic, the mother with a little cub, and of course mother's being protective, and that's the only time I've ever been chased by one, and a mother came after me, and it was fine, but she did get a bit annoyed with me. And the next one, of course, is a cub that has just left her mother, and cubs stay with their mum for up to 2 years old, so they can really be quite big rather. And when they leave their mother as a 2-year-old, they can find life fairly difficult. They find catching food difficult, and they easily get scared, and are more likely to attack because of those 2 things. So just be a little bit careful with those. The other one is an old bear. You can tell those with a rather sort of black or grey nose, and they're often looking a bit like me, a bit old and scraggy. And be a bit careful of those. And then the last one, which is a real difficult one, is a sleeping bear. And I don't know if any of you at home have got pet dogs, but you probably noticed that pet dogs and pet cats and so on, the carnivores, they do sleep an inordinate amount of time. And that's certainly the case for bears. They don't use energy unless they really need to. And I've heard it said that if you called a day and an hour for a polar bear, they're sleeping from 50 minutes to 55 minutes. And they sleep very deeply. And if you wake one up, they can be very grumpy and take a while to wake up, and just might have a go at you just because they're feeling like I do sometimes when I wake up in the morning, sometimes a little bit grumpy. So, but we keep our distance, and we're very careful, and we take all sorts of measures, as you know, Jamie, when we're out in these places, to make sure we don't have encounters. And if we do watch one, it's in, one where we know we're so distant. Best way to see a polar bear is through a pair of binoculars, actually, and they're relaxed, and we're relaxed as well.
Well, Nick, I've always remember that hint that you've given us when we're traveling by Skidoo to a glacier, traveling maybe through the moraine field where there's sort of like potential hiding spots to rev our engines before we go round the corner, just to wake up any polar bear that may be sleeping around the corner, so we don't sort of like drive on top of it and wake it up when we're too close. So I've remembered that one.
Well, certainly, and when we're on foot in the summertime, when we can't use skidoos, then you wait just to talk to each other. If you're on your own, to sing a song or whistle a tune or something, and try and wake the bear up before you get anywhere close. That's the number one. Yeah.
Brilliant, and that's great, because that's also covered a question from Waden School, and they were interested in how do you protect yourself against animals that could be potentially dangerous, and it's really by taking all these precautions. There's so many questions coming through on the live chat. If you can store those up towards the end of this live lesson, and that's when we're going to get to them. It's just so that, because there's so many comments coming, and it's absolutely fantastic. But we'll come back to those live chat questions. So you might have to repost them towards the end of this live lesson. Just coming back to the pre-submitted questions we've got from questions that's come a little bit on the live chat and also here is: do you ever get bored with the whiteness of the polar regions? Is that something that sort of is a bit monotonous?
No, not at all, actually. It's, I think one of the sort of misconceptions people have about polar regions is that it is just completely white. And of course, much of the time it is completely white, but the colours, the changing colours, whether you suddenly get a pink hue or a purple, or you might have aurora in the sky, you might have moonlight and lovely shadows. I can remember once going along with the dog team, and it was minus, I think, sort of knocking on 40, minus 40 something. And my friend who was driving another team was doing a good pace. He was running beside the sledge because it was good, hard surface, and he didn't have to have skis on. But the vapor coming off the dogs in the intense cold was extraordinary. So the snow in the low sunlight was a sort of lime yellow, and the dog team was like a huge long rugby ball in a very bright purple, and I couldn't see the dogs at all, and his head was just bobbing out of the top of it every now and again. So there was this 70-foot long rugby ball traveling along on the ice. One of the most extraordinary things I've ever seen. But I think what I'm trying to say is that the place is very much more colourful. Then, of course, you've got wind tails and sastrugi, all these lovely shapes that are sculpted by the blowing snow, and these lovely little mare's tails or horse tails of whipping, blowing snow, which you've seen, Jamie. So it's ever-changing and mesmerising. It's a bit like, in many ways, looking at the sea. And I think we all love just to look at the sea in its different ways and different colours. And it's mesmerising. Wonderful.
And Nick, there's a sort of follow-up question from that, and that's from St Paul's Church of England Primary School. And specifically, and you mentioned the aurora, but specifically about the sort of aurora and what that's like. We see photographs of it, but is it different to experience it for real?
Yes, I think for me, anyway, I think it makes you, like a lot of sort of major things, it makes you feel giddy and excited. It's there's something very sort of childish comes out. It's something so new, so immense, so beautiful. So beautiful. But one of the marked things is, and I've heard other people say as well, is that you become almost certain that you can hear it. And there might be a scientist listening who says there is or not, I don't know, but as far as I'm aware, there isn't a noise, but you do feel it's so explosive. It's like the sort of best firework display you ever saw, really.
Absolutely incredible, Nick. We've got a whole group of questions here on temperature, and obviously the temperature is a big part of being in the polar regions. Two things I'd love to do is just to find out about what it's been like for you at really cold temperatures, the coldest temperatures you've been at, and then perhaps we can just talk about the general climate in the Ålesund afterwards.
Yeah. There's a certain amount, I would say there's a certain amount of myth about polar cold, because it's very dry cold. And I know here in a UK winter, and which we get quite high humidity, quite damp cold, it can be really quite difficult to stay warm, even though it's not terribly cold temperature-wise. Whereas in polar regions, if you put on a jacket like you're wearing, Jamie, you feel snug as a bug fairly swiftly. I mean, and you can add layers, and layers is the big thing. Layers and layers of clothes. Not just one big jacket or whatever, but a few layers, and that really gets you warm. And in many ways, sort of being down at sort of -10 to -20 is actually really lovely, because it tends to be drier, and if it's windy, of course, it's chilly. If the wind's blowing like stink, it's chilly. But if it's calm, it's really quite nice. And then you get down into the -20s and so on, and 30s. And 30s, you starting to take it a bit more seriously. And 40s and below 50, then even more so. And I think the things that come into your mind when it does get extremely cold is you begin to realize just how vulnerable you are. If you're out in the middle of nowhere, long way from your base or some means of safety. That, for instance, if you put your gloves down, one layer of your gloves, and it blows away, that could be catastrophe. Yeah. If you spill something, a pan of water or something in the tent on your clothing, then that again could lead to real big problems. Or if your feet got damp, you go through the sea ice and through a crack in the sea ice and get your boots wet, then again that really could be big problem. So it does make you very sort of just careful, and you notice it when you come back in base after a journey in big cold, and I think others who these people who've done bigger journeys than I have ever done and so on in extreme cold, and it takes you a while to be able to even put down your gloves without sort of watching it or putting a weight on top and so on. But the fact is, as I was saying earlier, if you sort of abide by good rules that your clothing is good and dry when you put it on in the morning, and you put on plenty of layers. But one of the big things, of course, is not to sweat. And if you're doing a lot of exertion, whether it's digging out a tent or digging out a skidoo or digging out a dog or whatever the job might be, you've got to be very careful that you kind of open up your jackets and so on and make sure you vent, because if the sweat freezes on you, then you're going to have a very uncomfy day, and there's always the possibility of having frostbite and all those nasty things that you really best to avoid.
Thank you. I mean, this is absolutely useless for doing any work in this jacket. Great for standing around and filming in, but for doing any work, I'd sort of end up sort of wearing a sort of like an ice jacket, as all my sort of perspiration would freeze on the inside there. Nick, we've got a lot of questions that are coming through, not just about the extreme cold, which is great to hear about, but also about the general climate of Svalbard and Ny-Ålesund. And I think that Ellie, our wonderful producer, can take us to the webcam shot from the weather station at the Zeppelin station in Ny-Ålesund at the moment. And Ellie, if you can just tell us, I know the audience can't hear, but if you can tell us and we can repeat, how does Ny-Ålesund look like at the moment?
Hang on, they should be able to hear me now. We've just got
Brilliant.
we can look here, this was updated 2 minutes ago, and if I play the last 24 hours, we've got quite a fair bit of snow on the ground. We don't have ice coming in there on the sea. But the key thing there that we noticed, and we can ask Nick about, is the sun, if you watch, goes straight across. Wait for it. Here it is. The sun, you should see, goes straight across the sky there. And this is a 24-hour window, the last 24 hours. And as you can see, it's been light that whole time.
Amazing. Nick, we've got a question that I know that's going to come up, but what's it like adapting to this 24-hour daylight in the polar regions coming from the UK?
Well, I think I did 3 winters in Antarctic and 1 winter trip going from dark to light in the Arctic, and it's an exhilarating time and very exciting to see the sun in the sky after months of dark. And I've known the people who were the least imaginative members of our base, who really didn't get excited about very, very much, would get animated and excited. I always remember one of our mechanics who said it was like a fried egg high in the sky. He just couldn't believe it. He could see this lovely, bright sunshine. And so it's really uplifting. It's lovely. And of course, it's doing you good, and it does everybody good. It lightens your heart, and lightens your step, and it's a very happy time. Yeah,
brilliant. And it's we're coming into spring currently in the Ålesund. But what's the general climate of, I know we're on the west coast here of Svalbard, so we've got a sort of more of a maritime climate with the currents coming past. But what's the general climate for Ny Ålesund sort of over the year?
Yeah, as you said there, Jamie, it's a maritime climate, and we're on the west coast. And those who know about the North Atlantic drift coming up from around the equator, comes up this pocket of warm water, or stream of warm water, and it kisses. The last sort of landfall for that warm water is on the west of Svalbard. Of course, it's much cooler by the time it gets there, but we do have a slightly warmer temperature there that we might have on the same latitude going around the globe in that part of the Arctic. And I've seen it increasing in temperature, or raised temperatures over the years since I've been going up there. And normally, in normal winters, we used to be talking about minus 30 in the winter, and I've been down to some minus 40s on sledge journeys on the east coast, and now we really sort of talk about minus 20s or just touching minus 30 to be, the real cold snaps. So it's still cold. We don't get as much sea ice as we used to. I think 2006 was the last time we had really solid ice on that coastline for traveling on frozen sea. And sea freezes at something like minus 1.6 degrees centigrade, something round about that temperature. But this year, recently, it's broken out now. As Ellie said, the fjord is looking clear, the seascape. But they did have ice which was travelable, so they could go on the frozen sea this year. So there's been this nice little blip, but generally it is warmer. And then, of course, now, as you say, the sun is above the horizon, and it shows above the horizon for the first time on about March 7th in Ny Ålesund. We see it there anyway. And then by mid-April, 24-hour sunshine, and that continues to the end of August. And then it dips, and we get a short spell of day and night. And then by October time, mid-October, it's 24-hour darkness through till end of February, early March. Yeah.
Yeah. And during the summer, what kind of temperatures are we now sort of experiencing on Svalbard?
In the shade, we were talking about 3, 4, 5 degrees centigrade. Somebody might prompt me on that, because it's ever changing, these things, but it's something like that. But you can be out of the wind in direct sunshine, and it can really be pleasantly warm. I mean, you can really feel really quite warm. Those days when it's not windy are pretty far and few between, but you get behind a building and out of the wind, and it can be quite warm.
Nick, just following on from this, we talked a lot about the sun disappearing for a number of months and then coming back. What's going on there? Because that doesn't, if I'm living in the UK, I don't get disappearing sun. So how come that's happening in Svalbard?
Well, the Earth is, the Earth is tilting slightly, 23.5 degrees or so, and as we go around, at the North Pole, for instance, talk about being actually right on the top of the world, there would be something like, because of the tilt, you get a shadow, you're in the shadow of the sun for approximately 6 months of the year, and in full daylight for approximately 6 months of the year. And that graduates down to the Arctic Circle, which is at about 66.5 degrees latitude. And there you get approximately 1 day of light and 1 day of darkness. So it sort of graduates between that. But it is the tilt of the Earth that gives us that shadow or full glaring sunshine.
Amazing. A few questions now about sort of being life up in the Arctic, and there's two. I'm going to group them together because they're quite fun, sort of like juxtaposition. From Avril, what's the most dangerous part of being in the Arctic? And then from Denise is what you missed most when you're in the Arctic.
The most dangerous. I think overall, the most dangerous occupation is actually being out in a boat, which you have done and your colleagues. And that actually is because there's no bigger desert than the sea. And polar seas have that added disadvantage of being a bit chilly as well. So, if anything goes wrong, you can be swept away in an ocean. And outboard motors and engines and so on are that little bit less reliable because of the cold, and then of course you have to contend with frozen blocks of ice, whether it's sea ice or glacier ice, and all those things. So if things go wrong on the sea, that can really be bad business, bad thing to happen. And then on the land, of course, crevassing is the sort of Russian roulette, if you like, of polar travel. It's one of those dangers which we have to take very strong measures to ensure doesn't happen, that we don't fall down holes. And that's where ice is moving, whether it's glacier or ice sheets moving, and for various reasons you get cracks in the ice, and they can be wide, they can be sort of that wide to who knows, 50 meters across, maybe more, something like that, for a really big one. And depth, they can be hundreds of feet deep. So, we have to be terribly careful. And then, of course, they get covered at the top, bridged over and covered in snow, and you can't see where they are. So we take there's all sorts of methods that we use to ensure we don't fall down holes, but they are one of the bigger dangers. But the great thing about being out on the ice is unlike being at sea, if you get lost, for instance, you can stop and work it out where you are. And if things go badly wrong, you again can stop and assess the situation and get yourself sorted out. But so I think being on the sea and crevassing on the land are they're the big, probably the most dangerous things we do.
Nick, and have you fallen down a crevasse?
Yes, I have. On several times, and thankfully got away with it. And more often than not, it's. Friends and colleagues of mine have done proper swings where they've gone for a real old swing down there on a, because we tend to be attached to a rope and attached to somebody else. So there is a way of stopping you from dropping. But yes, I've gone down, quite a few times and got jammed just in the thing. Sometimes with a dog team, you travel along and you'd have a little loop of rope onto the handlebar. There are two uprights at the rear end of the sled, and you'd have a little loop on the handlebar, like so, and then attached to your waist. I have mine here, actually, somewhere. There's my old thing there, and there's that bit there goes around my waist, and then that bit of rope there was attached from me onto the back of the sled, so that if I drop down a hole, I'd come out like a cork out of a bottle because the dog team pulled you out. And it was great because you hardly drop, you suddenly just went whoop, and then next thing you were up and going again. Yeah.
And traveling, I mean, we there's different ways of, it's fascinating, so I'm just going to sort of go with a couple of these things. But there's different ways of traveling across the land, and you've done sort of huge amounts of this. I mean, nowadays skidooing, but you've done a lot of traveling with dogs in both north and south.
Yes, yeah.
And I think we've got some amazing photographs of you sort of working with the dog teams. What is traveling with dogs like across these regions?
Yeah, it's a lovely experience, and they're an extraordinary animal. Most people call them huskies. In fact, the polar or the high polar dog, the one in the intense cold, we tend to use a dog which is called a Greenland dog, and they're related to the Ellesmere Island and Greenland wolves, and they're much bigger than the husky, and can withstand much lower temperatures. They're very much more wolf-like. Their habits and their sort of social habits and their whole sort of behavior is much more like a wild wolf. So that's a great thing, because they can stand the cold. They've been bred to pull, and 9 of them will pull something like 300 or 400 kilo on a sled for weighing. Each dog can be weighing up, a male could be weighing, up to 45 kilo or even more. So a big animal. But one of the downsides of them is that wolf relationship is that they're quite vicious with each other. And there's very little you can do about that. They have the pecking order as a pack of wolves does, where you have the dominant male, and it's a sort of pecking order down to the weakest one down at the far end. And people try and discipline them and try and stop them being aggressive to each other. But I was always the firm belief that, that's the natural thing they want to do. And it's actually that sort of fighting spirit that they have that makes them work so hard, and stand the cold and all these marvels. They're wonderful creatures, absolutely very affectionate to us. But to each other, they have this ability to beat each other up every now and again.
Absolutely amazing. Nick, I just wanted to go back to the other part of the question, talking about the dangers of traveling by boat. I mean, I imagine one of the wonderful things of traveling by boat are some of the wildlife you would see, which you might not see on land, and in particular, I know that when we've been up in the Olsen, we've had some sort of whale sightings.
Yeah.
And I think you have some artifacts, I think that's one way of putting it, from whales. What have you just to show us some of the sort of like the scale of these wonderful animals? What have you got a couple of things for us?
Yeah, I have. And what is lovely up in the north, we're seeing more and more whales, particularly the big whales. We get, of course, the beluga, the white whale, which is very, very pretty, and we get a lot of those. Increasingly, we're getting the larger whales, the fin whale and the blue whale. And the blue whale, of course, is the largest mammal that ever lived on Earth. They're just colossal. I've read somewhere that the tongue of a blue whale weighs the same as an elephant. Somebody might prompt me on that, but that's what I read. And they're just so colossal. And just here, some things picked up. And I'll show you this and just see if anybody watching can see it. So that's from a whale. That's the densest bit of bone on a whale. Beautiful piece of bone there. What's that? That's probably about 4 or 5 inches long.
So I'm just seeing if on the live chat we're going to have any guesses about what that is.
Just see if anybody's clever enough to. Looks a bit like a seashell.
And we'll just wait for that to come up, Nick. But I think just.
I'll show you the other one now.
Yes, perfect.
Now this is also a part of the whale, which is maybe a little bit easier to guess.
Wonderful. And what whale is this? Is this one from?
This one is from one of the toothed whales. It's a sperm whale's tooth.
Okay.
The other one, I've been told, is from a blue whale, and it's an ear bone. So
an ear bone. We had tailbone coming up, but ear, we had ear, tooth, ear.
Oh, well done. Very well done.
Some great usernames coming up, which are sort of, but we've had Ben, Oscar, and Motocross Pug also got the
well done them.
No.
Well done them. It's the densest bone, I'm told, in the whale is the ear bone. Very beautiful thing.
Nick, very sadly, we've only got a few minutes left. But as we're in this extraordinary sort of situation of lockdown life, could you share any top tips? I think we've got a photograph of you in overwintering early on in your career. Any top tips from having sort of been locked down during a polar winter that you can share with people watching at home?
Yeah, aren't these strange times? And aren't you all marvellous putting up with this extraordinary time in lockdown and all the various rules and regulations and things that we have to do to get through this? And it's not unlike the sort of challenge of polar regions, really. It's we're confined, can't go anywhere for whether it be weather or whatever. So it's not unlike, and it raises challenges, and in many ways, I think brings out the best in us. And so, well done, you all, dealing with this, and you'll be ever so proud of yourself afterwards if you've dealt with it well. I'm sure you will. And it is rather like it, as you say, Jamie, in an Antarctic base, or being a long time out in a tent or a boat journey or whatever. It's I think there's a sort of self-preservation instinct comes into play. Number one, and absolutely number one, is just looking after each other. I think polar regions, people wonder about the cold, they wonder about the food and all these sorts of things, and the isolation. Everything, nothing's a problem at all as long as everybody's getting on well together. And I think that's where a polar expedition, whatever it might be, if it's a success or otherwise, the success is because everybody got on well with each other and look after each other and kind to each other and have a sense of humour. That's a good thing to have as well.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Nick. Nick, we could so many questions. We could go on for hours. I'm just going to say to those watching, we've only got time for a few more questions. We're going to take those. One from pre-submitted. We've got one left on where I am, and then we'll have a look at the live chat. If you haven't had your question answered and you submitted it in advance, we will try to answer it at the 5 p.m. call this afternoon. If your live chat question has not been answered, please post it now in these sort of next 5 minutes, and we will copy and paste those questions and save them for the later live lesson. Do please subscribe to the Encounter EDU channel so that you will be notified of when that goes up later today, and any further videos which will include answers to your questions. Nick, just a couple here is from Denise, is what do you miss the most when exploring?
Oh, I think I would say, and I think goes for everybody, it's family and dear friends. It's, you certainly don't miss the sort of things you might expect, some of the sort of luxury things that we have, whether it's music to motor cars to whatever. I certainly miss birdsong. And the wildlife, but family's the number one.
Family's the number one, and I think that really sort of reflects what we're going through at the moment, is that we probably do without a lot of the frippery, but seeing family, seeing friends
Absolutely.
is a big part of what people are missing at the moment. So last but by no means least question, this is from Ramesh, and it's a lovely one to end on, is why do you like the Arctic?
Why do I like the Arctic? It's a very good question. It's one of the two, that and the Antarctic, are the two probably most untouched, unexplored, unknown, pristine, clean, beautiful parts of the planet, and somewhere which human beings shouldn't really be there. You know, it's not a sort of climate that human beings can really supposed to live in. So feel very, very privileged to be able to work there, and with these magnificent scientists and technicians who work with to try and make life possible, to make science possible, and to come out with the great answers that they come out with from the work they do. Yeah, wonderful places.
Well, Nick, thank you so much for sharing your experiences, your stories, your insights into work and life in the frozen parts of our planet. It's been so lovely to talk to you, and very much looking forward to speaking again later today. For those watching, do remember that we have 2 live investigations for Thursday and Friday. On tomorrow, on Thursday, we have looking at materials and keeping warm. And then on Friday, we're looking at the impact of melting ice on sea level rise. Does it matter what type of ice it is? Next week is all about the science that we've been looking at. There's the science of a changing Arctic. So get all your environmental questions stocked up for next week. We'll be talking to marine and polar experts from the Plymouth Marine Laboratory and Exeter University, and specifically about ocean acidification, changing in the chemistry of the ocean, and plastics in the Arctic. So get those stored up. But thank you so much to everyone who's been watching. You've amazing questions, and so many coming through on the live chat through. We'll get to those later. But for now, also thank you to Nick. It's been lovely to talk to you. But for now, it's goodbye from Arctic Live. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone. Bye.